Hello, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I would like to, I have been the energy team leader at the World Bank. I actually gave my notice a couple of months ago, so I'm currently in transition out of the World Bank, so I'm not speaking for the World Bank right now. But I have many years of experience, and I can share some of the things our moderator asked me to. I had picked up two of the subtopics, impact of Uday and the progress in reducing cross-subsidies, as two items that I just wanted to spend a few minutes sharing my thoughts, and then we can have a discussion subsequently. So the power sector has been, as we all know, the DISCOM sector, has been sort of limping from bailout to bailout over the number of last many years, as Mr. Dasgupta has been pointing out. This is going on since the 90s. The World Bank did indeed recommend unbundling, and, but we believe that this was actually started in some Indian states. They started undertaking their own reforms, and the World Bank then came in and tried to push towards a more generalized notion of adopting it as a national program. The idea was really to introduce accountability. I think that if you have the cost centers and the profit centers separately, you can really see what's happening to the money, the following the money. Where's the investment money going? So the rationale for recommending the unbundling was really more of transparency and accountability. I think we all have to be honest and say that hasn't really happened. And we have not really been able to see a substantial, tons and tons of consulting reports have been written, and we have a slew of alphabet soup, APDRP, RAPDRP, FRP, Uday, IPDS, Uday, and all these alphabet soups. And essentially, if anyone were to look at all the consulting reports and the recommendations that come out of it, there's very little that's different in any of these incarnations. Basically, make a consumer database, do metering everywhere, like feeder metering, distribution transformer metering, do efficient billing. Basically, then you do demand-side management. You have to basically more frequently increase your tariffs. That's the new one on Uday, that you should have quarterly tariff revisions. And essentially, the other new one in Uday is you have an IEC, a consumer awareness campaign, to talk about theft, educate consumers on the impact of theft, and also educate people like us towards the change of the mindset, why power should not be expected as a right or a public good to be given for free. So a couple of these new things in Uday are this consumer education, and the quarterly tariff revision is being more emphasized, and the demand-side management. Those were not in earlier reports. Earlier reports were mainly focusing on the upstream things like having a consumer database and doing metering. And then, of course, there's consumer indexing and GIS mapping. But I think I've basically touched on the buckets of recommendations that have been in 20 years of advisory work on how to reform the distribution sector. So it's not rocket science. If you permit me, there's a 3-sentence quote. Some of you might have heard this, very interesting quote. This was made 10 years ago by Mr. Deepak Parekh when he was he was chairing a committee on distribution reforms. He was chairman of IDFC at that time. And he said the following: "The Indian power sector is a leaking bucket with holes deliberately crafted and leaks carefully collected as economic rents by various stakeholders that control the system. The logical thing to do would be to fix the bucket rather than to persistently emphasize the shortages of power and forever make exaggerated estimates of future demands for power. Most initiatives in the power sector are nothing but ways of pouring more water in the bucket so that the consistency and quantity of leaks are ensured. Now, this is a purely political economy statement, and I think most of us probably believe it, that it is still the case. There's no reason, other than lack of political will, for the distribution sector not to be fixed. None of the recommendations that the consultants have made are difficult or impossible, but the reason that they are not happening, I believe, is that the distribution sector, more than any other part of the power sector value chain, does not have any operational autonomy. And actually, the professionals and the technical experts are simply not allowed to have any much say in how to fix the sector. The bureaucrats run the companies, and they are answerable, they make themselves answerable to the political leadership of the state, although they shouldn't. And I believe that it's not a professionally run, I mean, people say we should have commercial viability, but then the steps to do so are not taken. And I think there's an almost deliberate approach to keep the recommendations and the objectives and the ambitions very general, instead of getting down into details. We have an interesting view in my team as to why we don't think that Uday is going to work either. And that is because Uday is totally focused on the finances. It is really a relief, if you had to give it a subtitle, it's really a banking sector relief package. It really doesn't have anything to do with the operational realities of the DISCOM, nor fixing it. It is really how can I prevent my banks from collapsing, and how can I relieve the financial pressure on the DISCOM. That's it. That's what Uday is now doing. And if you look at the objectives of the program, it is mainly geared towards debt relief package for the DISCOM, and let the DISCOM's balance sheet become more integrated into the state finances balance sheet. The first year you don't make the state, the money, the additional liabilities taken by the state, you don't count those in FRBM for the state, but you are immediately substantially increasing the indebtedness of the state, because in future years that will count as part of the fiscal responsibility limits. So if Uday had, since we were asked by Mr. Dasgupta to suggest also some solutions rather than just do armchair commentary, I would like to suggest, and again, as I said, I'm not speaking on behalf of the World Bank now, this is my view, that I think that there needs to be some kind of formal program management, like somebody watching the implementation of this, which would be a committee consisting of consumers and industry. In other words, the relevant stakeholders who are most affected by the achievement of operational improvements of the DISCOM. They are really the interested parties. So we should have, as part of Uday or whatever is going to be the next successor of Uday, any scheme needs to have well-defined targets, a well-defined monitoring program for those targets, as well as corrective actions if the targets are slipping. And most importantly, there need to be consequences. None of the bailout programs so far have had any consequences of any kind. If it doesn't happen, so what? We all understand that there are problems. That's not going to get us anywhere. So what I think some of the consequences could be, would be that, okay, if you consistently miss your targets and you're unable during a buffer period to get it fixed under the existing DISCOM management, which is run by a bureaucrat, but if he or she faces consequences of the DISCOM not improving performance due to excessive political interference, then he's going to be removed as the CMD, and his management team is all going to be replaced by a management contractor for 10 years. Let's see if they can do a better job, if you guys can't do a better job. We know from having worked with a lot of potential franchisee discussions that immediately the DISCOM teams all shape up. It really focuses the minds of the people who are in charge of running the DISCOMs and their bosses if they think that a franchisee or some other outside force is going to come in and take over their role. They suddenly, with all existing, without a single penny of new investment, they all suddenly overnight manage to do a much better job. So we know that that's possible. So I think articulation of a monitoring group, well-defined, transparent, public, and having sort of well-defined consequences for not meeting the targets, as well as eventually, if it gets really, like even with the management contractor and everything, if nothing changes, if the thing still continues to be really bad, then eventually I think the state has to start divesting some portion of its shares. The state has to say, okay, I can't run this, no matter whether I get outside hands or inside hands, I'm not able to, so let's turn this over to somebody who can really run it. So that would be the extreme consequence of having lack of improvement. So then I think that the one issue for which we really need political leadership, if this is going to work, is that there will be resistance by employee unions. So if the state is not willing to take that on and have a dialogue with the unions and understand and get them on board as to how they will not be personally necessarily impacted. A lot of people are close to retirement age anyway. I mean, there are ways to handle this, but if the state political leadership is not going to be proactive and take the employees into confidence as to why this has to change, then one may as well not even embark on this kind of thing, because I think that will not work. I personally think when we talk about a monitoring program to make sure that the agreed changes are actually happening, the regulator has a big role to play there. I think a lot of regulators have been in India, very sort of going by the book. Okay, you see me once a year, you bring me your rate case, I will adjudicate your rate case, you bring it to me by the deadline, I'll get back to you after a certain number of months, and I will tell you whether you got your tariff increases that you wanted or not, and that's it. And the rest of the time, there's no contact, as far as I know, between the regulator and the DISCOM, and they are seen as two opposing camps. I don't think that's a good idea either. I think that regulators, such as we heard in the West Bengal case, which is wonderful, I think many more regulators in the country should really have a hands-on approach. And when you, for example, approve money for an increased revenue requirement, because the DISCOM has told you, I need to undertake XYZ capital projects, capital investment projects, do not just leave it at that after you approve it. Jolly well follow up and make sure that those things are happening and that those capital investment projects are on time and on target and on budget, because otherwise nothing will really move. And then next year when they come back for another rate case, they will again have the same capital project, slightly tweaked, and you'll be over and over again approving the revenues required for something that is not moving, lack of implementation. So I believe that the regulator must play a much bigger role in holding the DISCOM's feet to the fire. Like, let's really make sure you're doing what you say. I just wanted to comment on my other bullet point, which I had picked out. This will be very brief. This is on progress of reduction of cross-subsidies. I have no inside information, but I can just say what I saw as I was leading. The World Bank was having, still is having, a $1 billion solar program in India, of which we have delivered now the solar rooftop portion, which I was leading, which is $625 million, has been recently approved by our board. That money will come through, it'll be channeled through the State Bank of India, and they should be pretty soon announcing a launch and so on, so it'll be in the news. But we've done that, and the remainder is for solar parks and possibly for transmission line out of solar parks. Those are still work in progress. Now, on the rooftops, I could see that the DISCOM is actually scaring away a lot of potential foreign investment in solar, because the DISCOM ultimately, everybody knows that the DISCOM is totally sort of captured by state-level political interests. Yesterday evening, I think Mr. Dole at the beginning said we have to reduce uncertainty if we want to attract private investment. I think this lack of reduction of uncertainty on the DISCOM has made us see that foreign investors are flocking to PPAs with NTPC rather than with the DISCOM. If you tell them they can sell to NTPC, they're fine with it because they trust NTPC much more than the DISCOM. So the DISCOMs, what we saw is that the DISCOMs really, most of them, particularly the state-owned ones, there's a sharp difference with private DISCOMs. State-owned DISCOMs do not want any kind of solar rooftop. They're very unenthusiastic because they tell us that they will lose their commercial and industrial customers who give the cross subsidies, which they are entirely dependent upon. So we said to them that we thought you were reducing the cross subsidies and we thought those are being phased out. So we found out that nothing like that is happening. The cross subsidy is alive and well, and it is something that is a mainstay of the DISCOM's commercial survival strategy. So that's just, I'll just close with that comment. I don't think there has been any progress in reduction of cross subsidies in many of the countries' DISCOMs. Thank you very much for your attention.